Well, the French embassy in Ouagadougou says France's army has had no involvement in recent events in Burkina Faso. The embassy said that it was issuing its statement in response to reports circulating on social media. France's relationship with its former African colonies has grown increasingly tense in recent months. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy tells us more.
Burkina Faso is among the countries in the Sahel where French troops have been assisting local forces in combating a growing insurgency. Paris has been leading the joint deployment of Operation Barkhane with approximately 5,000 French troops deployed in the region. Operation Barkhane mainly targeted militants operating within the Sahel region. Their main roles have been to provide intelligence and training to Burkina Faso's military and security agencies. The French presence in the country had reassured the government in Ouagadougou of a return to peace and stability. But France's recent redefinition of its security strategy in the region has seen growing violence and insecurity. The latest coup in Burkina Faso has inflamed anti-French sentiments in the West African country. Protesters have accused French troops of harboring the hosted interim president, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba. French authorities have denied any involvement and condemned the violence. But uncertainty continues in the capital Ouagadougou as protesters demand the exit of French troops from Burkina Faso. France has maintained that the security of its citizens is a priority following the latest military coup. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, for more on the situation in Burkina Faso, we're now joined from Cape Town by Leonard Mbule Nzege, a political analyst and economist. Thank you so much for joining us there, Leonard. Given that this is the second time that the military has taken over the government in Burkina Faso, how would you describe what is happening in that country?
Good afternoon once more. As we know, there was a coup d'etat that took place in Burkina Faso. The military has been at the forefront of politics in Burkina Faso since independence in 1960. So this coup wasn't a surprise, especially considering recent developments. The security situation has degenerated significantly. On the 26th of September, there was an attack on a military convoy, and that led to the death of 10 soldiers. Beforehand, earlier in the month, 35 civilians had died at the hands of presumed jihadists. And as a result of the deteriorating security situation, there have been a significant reduction in troop morale. This also was contributed to the fact that the former president, Colonel Paul Damiba, had dismissed the Minister of Defense on 13 September and replaced the minister with himself. So the situation at hand had become very complex and led to disgruntlement and the overthrow of the president the other day.
Leonard, in both these recent coups, the coup leaders say that they had to step in because national security in the country was in such a dire state. And we keep on hearing how complex this particular security situation in Burkina Faso is. What are the factors that you think make security in the country challenging?
Well, first and foremost, the biggest issue is that historically there hasn't been a large state presence across the country. So a lot of the areas which have been fallen under the control, at least have a significant violent extremist group presence, is because the state hasn't had much of a presence there. So now just deploying the military isn't enough. And furthermore, the Burkina Faso military has been historically under-resourced. The former president, Blaise Compaoré, himself a former military leader, he had invested a lot in special defense forces and not capacitating the general army. So as a result, you had a disproportionate capacitation of some elements. Meanwhile, the rest of the army wasn't equipped to be able to handle the rise in violent extremist and jihadist activity. And as a result, Burkina Faso, close to 60% of the country, is occupied or at least has a significant presence of these armed groups.
Now, what we have been hearing is Burkina Faso's self-declared leader say that the man he ousted a day ago is plotting a counter-attack. He's also accused the French army of harboring Damiba. Tell us more, Leonard, about the international influences that we see in Burkina Faso.
Well, it's quite interesting. Burkina Faso has historically had an acrimonious relationship with France, despite it being the former colonial power. Many people attribute the death of the former Burkinabe president Thomas Sankara to the influence of France because he had an anti-France stance. Nevertheless, during the Blaise Compaoré presidency and up to present, Burkina Faso, France has had a significant security presence. There's the Opération Sabre, which is present in Burkina Faso and is helping the country to fight the violent extremist threat. Nevertheless, there has been accusations that France is helping, trying to assist to bring in Paul Damiba back to power. The French Ministry of Foreign Affairs has denied that. But yesterday, there were violent protests in front of the French embassy in Ouagadougou and in the country's second largest city, Buba Dialusu. There was also attacks against there was violent attacks against the French Institute there. So there is palpable anti-French sentiment, and that leads to the possibility that maybe there might be a push to bring in the Russians to help support the fight against violent extremism and terrorism in Burkina Faso.
Now, part of the condemnation that we have been hearing, Leonard, is the African Union and ECOWAS saying that this takeover, they've called it unconstitutional. They've also described the latest coup as a step back in efforts towards civilian rule. What will it take, Leonard, for Burkina Faso to achieve a civilian-led government?
Yes, ECOWAS has really been exposed for their ineptitude because the condemnations are simply condemnations. Because even with the sanctions that have been placed against Mali, Guinea, and previously against Burkina Faso, that in itself doesn't resolve the situation at hand, which is security. And it will be extremely difficult for there to be a transition to constitutional rule and civilian-led government in the event that this security situation isn't resolved. Because as I earlier said, upwards of 60% of the country is in the hands, or at least has a significant presence of these armed groups. So any civilian leader who would come into power would be confronted with this security situation. And as a result, this could lead to another coup, because we've seen that security has been at the forefront of the grievances which the soldiers have in society as a whole.
Thank you so much for all that. Leonard Mbule Nzega, a political analyst and economist, and he was speaking to us from Cape Town.